opinions yet. I thought we were going to do one of the Bavas, the one that we hadn't done yet. I think Bava Bava is the one we haven't done yet.
There's one, remember, the one that use all the
Eruv.
no, we studied it.
No, we didn't do Eruv, I don't think.
We didn't do
No, we did Shabbat, but we didn't do Eruv.
Oh, we did Shabbat?
It was before the video, yeah.
The 7 years that we did Brachot.
Right. Shabbat and Brachot were like the two that we began with.
No, we started with the previous one, the one related to Shavuot.
Really?
Yes.
Okay,
Is
good memory.
Was Eruv, is that where the people started doing Shabbat dinners that people do today so much?
The Shabbat dinner? What?
A lot of times people like to have Shabbat dinner. Did that originate with Eruv or no?
Everybody's always had a Shabbat dinner. I mean, having a meal to welcome Shabbat, that's always been typical.
I was just wondering if the whole community thing came from Eruv.
Oh, having it as a community activity?
Yeah.
No, not necessarily, no. In fact, I think generally most people would have Shabbat dinner with their family or just friends, not like, whole everybody. The idea of having like a synagogue Shabbat dinner, that's very new.
Because you had to have a community dinner to form the Eruv, right?
No, you had to have community food to form the Eruv. And the food did not have to be like actively being served on Shabbat. So, but that's a whole nother conversation.
Do you like Eruv?
Masechet.
Oh.
Do you like having an Eruv?
Yeah.
Do you hold by the Eruv?
No, we have here our Mishnah Rabbi. Okay, yeah.
Okay, we'll talk about that later. All right, so we are in Ketubot 12, which is very short, and then Ketubot 13. What's that? And then that's it for Ketubot, right? So that's why we're talking about maybe what we should do after we finish Ketubot. I don't think we're going to finish 13 tonight. So I think we've got at least this week and next week before we're done. And then we'll start up a new Masechet for the new year. All right, but tonight we're on chapter 12, Mishnah 1. Everybody picked up one of the packets or has their own copy of the Mishnah? Excellent. Okay, so again, as usual, we will start at the left and we will go around. Oh, before we begin, sorry, let me just make sure. Everybody knows, because we've been talking about it for 12 chapters, right? The Ketubot. Right? The Ketubot was the promised money from husband to wife if he won't. Right? Remember, being there could be by his death or being there could be by divorce. Right? That was what a ketubah was about, and it was in order to protect the wife from being poor, from being completely bankrupt when the husband dies or the husband divorces her. We're going to look in chapter 12. There's only 4 Mishnayot in chapter 12. We're going to look at a different contract and a different agreement between the husband and wife. So we're going to be looking at something that sounds like a ketubah, which is why it's in this whole Masechet, in this volume, but it's not in the ketubah unless it had been added in as a special stipulation, or more likely it was added in as a separate contract between the husband and wife before they got married. So it's not officially in the ketubah. This is a addendum or a separate contract. Does that make sense? But it's similar to a ketubah. That's why it's in this chapter. All right. With that in mind, let's see what the topic is about. Aaron, do you mind starting on my left?
Yes. If a man married a woman and she cut a deal with him that he should maintain her daughter for 5 years, he must maintain her for 5 years.
Okay. So what are we talking about here? Well, blended families are not new. The idea here is that you have a woman and she was married and they had a daughter and her first husband died, right? Or maybe he was divorced her or disappeared, or who knows. He's out of the picture. So she's alive, she's got a daughter, she's alive. The mother marries a new husband. When she marries a new husband, she's worried about the daughter because the new husband has no legal obligation to take care of that girl. That's not his daughter, right? That's what we'd call in the modern world his stepdaughter. So the mother, being a good mother, says, I'll marry you if you'll promise to give my daughter support for 5 years.
5 years before the bat mitzvah? Wow.
5 years. That's the stipulation at the moment, 5 years.
Just for the second.
So, we're, right.
Second man.
Right, for the second husband, exactly. So we're going to find out that the rabbis recommend that the husband be very careful with what he promises, the new husband. But at the moment, we have a blanket promise of 5 years, presumably from the time of marriage, and then counting 5 years regardless.
And what's happening if the daughter become married before the 5 years?
Wait until we read. You're asking the right questions. So this is what's known as priming your mind to begin to ask the right questions so that the answers the Mishnah are giving will be appropriate. So it's good that you're asking those questions, but don't expect me to answer them. The Mishnah is going to answer them. So you're on the right track.
If she was subsequently married to another man and cut a deal with him,
This is a third husband, right? This is the mother has now married again. She's remarried someone else. So presumably the first husband didn't work out. They got divorced. She now marries a third man for whatever reason. Remember, the first guy probably died. Second one got married. They're now divorced. And now she's married a new one. So this daughter has a biological husband, or biological father, who's no longer alive. And now she has 2 stepfathers. Good? Remember, complicated blended families? Not new. This has been going on for a long time.
if she cut a deal with him as well that he should maintain her daughter for 5 years, he must maintain her for 5 years.
Okay, so she made a deal with the husband number 2 to give 5 years of support to her daughter. And presumably, what we're dealing with in this situation, you all love my timelines, right, is we had marriage 1, marriage 2, and let's say marriage 3. Well, marriage 1, as we know, ended with a death. Whereas marriage 2, we gained a 5-year support, and marriage 3, we gained a 5-year support. What's the obvious question?
Yeah, not overlap.
They do overlap.
Oh.
So wait, how can there be 2 guys responsible for one daughter that isn't even theirs for at the same time?
Because it's a contract.
So the question is it a contract or was it just helping? So that's what the Mishnah is now going to try and untangle for us is what do we do with this overlap period? And how does this happen? And how does she get support from 2 guys, right? She's not living in both of their houses. So who's giving her breakfast?
So if she want to marry with someone, can someone
This
say,
is the mother, right?
No, the second one. Can someone say, no, I'm not interested in your daughter?
Absolutely.
So,
And then the mother would say, then I'm not interested in you.
Exactly.
So, I mean, and that was part of the arrangement.
So that really happened. That
Oh,
someone
absolutely. But I mean, she's absolutely allowed to say, this is, if you marry me, you're getting my daughter, and I need you to swear, I need a contract that you will take care of her for this amount of time. And the prospective husband is absolutely allowed to say, I'll take you, but not her. And then they have to either come to an agreement and say 5 years, 3 years, 3.5 years, or
Bye-bye.
or they don't get married.
But it's not any rabbinical law that can force the new husband to say, no, if you take her for the shlimut and the mishpacha, you need to take also the daughter.
Oh,
Because you have no mishpacha, you have no family.
yeah.
You have no bite
Marriage.
together until you're married.
Yeah.
So before you're married, he has no obligation. And if they get married without this contract, he has no legal obligation. Does he have a moral obligation? Does he have a community obligation? Does he have a social obligation? Depends on your community. In most cases, yes, it would be expected that he would take care of her. But here's the scenario the mother's worried about. She gets married to Mr. Man number 2 or man number 3, and she drops dead a month later, from plague or attacked by a bull, whatever. Well, her daughter has no father now. She is literally an orphan because the mother's dead, the father's dead, and the new husband, the stepfather of this girl, has no legal obligation unless they've made a contract to provide for her. And yes, we can hope that there would be grandparents or there'd be a cousin or an uncle or somebody else that might help. but we don't have any way to guarantee that. The mother's contract with these men is her way of trying to guarantee support for her daughter in the case that she disappears, but in general as well.
What happens if the mom is very, very poor and she really need to marry because if not, she cannot
Feed herself.
yes, or survive? Can she marry because that's the only way to have a job?
Yeah.
And
I mean, without any...
and send the kid to an orphan house, and the community will accept that?
Depends on the community. So legally, yes, the parents were allowed at a certain age, once they are like 6, 7, 8 years old, to say, I can't take care of the child anymore. And the community would take care of the child instead. Generally, the community would work hard to support a family so the children could stay with the parents. If someone can say, look, I have enough money for me, I have enough money for my wife, but we don't have enough money for our kids, they could get tzedakah from the community to help feed their children. That was possible. And the community would generally want the child to be supported in the family rather than moved to some other care facility. Because they didn't have like orphanages. You would usually just move in with someone else, more like what we have is a foster system nowadays. So they liked to keep the kids with the families where they could. But it depends on the community as well. And because oftentimes if one person's having that problem, sometimes everybody is having that problem. If the famine came, then nobody had enough food for anyone. So oftentimes that would be a big problem for everyone. But if it's just one family, usually the community could fix it. All right, so what happens? We've now got this overlap between these two guys, Mr. 2 and Mr. 3.
The first husband may not plead, if she will come to me, I will maintain her. Rather, he must send her maintenance to her at the place where her mother lives.
All right, so what we're finding out is that in Mr. 3, this is now where mom and daughter live, right? Those are two girls. Sorry for my art. So they live here. Mr. 2, it says, look, if the daughter wants to live in my house, I'll give her breakfast, I'll give her lunch, I'll give her dinner, right? I'll feed her. That's her maintenance. But I'm only going to do it if she's under my roof. And the Mishnah says, no, you don't get to say that. You signed a contract saying you would take care of this girl for 5 years. You never said that she had to be in your house. So even if she's living across town, or even if she's living in another state, you are obligated by the contract to take care of this girl for 5 years. Make sense?
And if he pass away, how they can calculate how much it will cost for 5 years of maintenance?
She's a creditor. She's a debtor. I mean, he has a debt to her. So the same way that if he had loaned money or if he had borrowed money from someone else, they have a claim against his estate. So the 5 years worth of maintenance would be a claim against his estate.
But someone calculate, who's in charge of calculate how much?
Well, the Beit Din, the court.
The Beit Din.
Yeah.
They can say, you know what, the 5 years is equal to this parcel of land, so you need to give him.
They absolutely, if he died, they could come and say, just like if someone came as a creditor and said, hey, I loaned him, 5 donkeys, and the donkeys are all gone and he's dead. The court can say, well, 5 donkeys are worth this, so that you get this amount from his estate. That's why being on the Beit Din was a hard job. Because you can imagine, no one's ever happy.
Was voluntary or
to be on the Beit Din? It was mostly it was voluntary in terms of that, but it wasn't voluntary, meaning that if you had the skills, you were expected to serve on the Beit Din. Right? That was a duty you gave to the community because you had studied Torah, because you knew halakha. You owed it to the community to share your knowledge. Okay. Similarly,
the 2 husbands cannot plead, we will maintain her jointly, but one must maintain her and the other give her the cost of maintenance.
All right, so you can imagine how this goes down, right? The 2 husbands, divorced husband number Mr. 2 and newly husband Mr. 3 says, okay, look, this girl isn't either one of ours daughter. So you give half, I give half, and we both, she's maintained and her mom will shut up about it. No, they each signed a contract. They each must maintain her, meaning they each have to pay enough to take care of her. The first one will do that by actually feeding her, right? She eats out of his kitchen. He's maintaining her. That was the contract.
But
The
not
other
living-
guy-
Not living with her.
No, that's Mr. 3,
Ah,
right? Mr. 2 has to send cash equal to the amount that she would need to be maintained. So basically, the girl is getting free money because her mom was smart when she made a deal with her husbands, right? Or the husbands were stupid when they made a deal with her mom, depending upon which way you want to look at it. But the point is that they can't say, well, I don't or do, or a contract is a contract. And that's what's being enforced here is the contract.
Who does the money belong to if she's an adult? It's obviously her. But
Right.
if she's a juvenile, juveniles can't own money.
Right, but the money would accrue to her and be used for her benefit. But
Does she develop a trust?
if it was significant enough, yes. But most likely, if it's maintenance here, we're talking about, your board, your food. It's not
Right.
not like he's sending her diamonds and fur coats.
Right, but the number 3 is providing the food, so the other one's just extra money, right?
The money equivalent to food, which again is not a huge amount under most circumstances. All right, Mishnah 2, which is going to answer the question that Natan asked at the very beginning.
He's saying, if she married her husband, if she married her husband must supply her with maintenance and they give her the cost of her maintenance.
All right, so back to our timeline. Ready? So we've got Mr. the number 1, man number 2, man number 3. I'm going to change to husband 1, right? Because this is for the daughter, right? It's the daughter's husband. The daughter gets married. But guess what? The contract is still ticking for the 2 guys. So now the husband maintains his wife, the daughter, and the 2 husbands are still on the hook for sending the support payment to take care of her
That's a wonderful capitalist.
because they made a deal. They made a contract. And the contract didn't say anything about husbands. It didn't say anything about second marriages or third marriages. The contract just said 5 years. And 5 years are still ticking. The money still is owed. Yeah. Okay. Don't worry. We're going to get to...
Lucky the new husband,
What's that?
the husband of the daughter.
Yeah, the guy married well. Well, and especially he married well because he married somebody who came from a mother who was smart enough to take care of making sure her daughter would always be taken care of.
But we saw that sometimes the wife stay with the money, not always give everything to the husband.
Sometimes, yes. So,
What happened in the situation with the money,
which money?
the cash that received from the?
You mean for the husband?
fathers?
Well,
Yes,
it becomes-
if she married, what happened with the money that she received from the 2 stepfathers? Go to the husband,
Mhm.
or
It's
or
just
she
like in
can
your-
use it.
It's like the property that comes to her that we talked about in the other chapters, right? It's like any property that comes to her during that time.
So it goes to the dowry then?
Well, it would go into the household accounts. Like it's the equivalent of her getting money from a pre-marriage source. The same way that if she had money from an investment before she was married, he would be allowed to use the usufruct, but the
Right.
principal would remain as hers. Okay, so part 2.
If they die,
That's Mr. 2 and Mr. 3, right?
their daughters are maintained out of their free assets only, but she must be maintained even out of assigned property because she's like a creditor.
All right, so if they die, she still gets to be maintained.
M2 and M3. Yes.
But by M2 and M3's estates,
Yeah.
she is still receiving the benefit of the contract, just like any other creditor would receive the benefit. I know we don't like to think of families as being, loans and debts and all of that, but it is, right? And especially in the ancient world,
You should do it because otherwise-
otherwise it can get very messy if it's just, oh, I thought that's what was doing, and I thought you were going to. No. Put it on paper, you make it clear. Right? Even then, paper can sometimes be misleading because I'm pretty sure, as the Mishnah is going to make clear, that husband, Mr. 2, didn't anticipate still paying for this girl even after she got married, along with some other guy paying for the same girl, even while the husband is paying for the girl. And he probably didn't anticipate that his estate would be paying for a girl who hasn't lived with him for maybe 3-4 years at that point.
Now, what happens if the daughter divorced the husband? The money of maintenance
So,
go to her or need to give to the husband?
No, it would still go to her. If she's divorced and she's now a single woman again, then she is still receiving if the 5-year
No,
clock.
because it's part of the house property.
But the principal would still be hers.
Okay.
The principal would still be hers. Just like if she had an orchard, the trees would still be hers. The fruit would belong to the husband until she was single, and then she owns both.
So the rest of the years.
Right.
That she has.
The
If she has
remainder.
another 1 or 2 years. it's-
Exactly. It all depends on how fast all of this was happening. Yes. I mean, again, the original agreement with the mother could have been take care of my daughter for 10 years, take care of my daughter for 30 years. I mean, it could have been any number that was agreed upon between the wife and husband. We're just using 5 years in this case.
You have to get married for this to happen, right? If there was a divorce after the betrothal, then he doesn't have to pay.
It all depends on how the contract was written, right? If you said, I will not betroth with you unless you make this agreement, then the betrothal would happen from that moment. The same way that a ketubah can happen from that moment, if that's how it is stipulated. On the other hand, if the stipulation is, this will not come into effect until you are in my house, then that would change the rules. Contracts go according to the language in which they're written, which is why we're going to read part 3.
Clever men used to write, on condition that I shall maintain your daughter for 5 years while you are with me.
Okay, so if you want to avoid all of this, you need to be a little clearer when you make a contract and say, I'll maintain her as long as you're with me. Meaning if the mother dies, the father dies, or whatever else, then he's off the hook. Or if she divorces and remarries, then M2 would no longer be paying. And if M3, and if she gets married to husband 1, M3 doesn't have to pay any longer either. So there are ways to write this that would avoid this double dipping or triple dipping scenario.
But if the mom passes away, the daughter is still receiving the money. because
By
the
this
contract
by this
of them
stipulation,
with the
yes,
daughter.
exactly. By this stipulation, yes.
Really?
But you could write
It's
it
a contract between the stepfathers
Ah.
with the daughter,
so
not with the mom.
with the original stipulation. He's right. In part 3, on the condition that you are with me, if the mother died, the daughter would not be taken care of, right? Because the mother is no longer with him. So it all comes down to the language used in the contract. So if you want the man to take care of your daughter, even if you, the mother, dies, then you'd want to say, as long as I or my daughter are with you, for 5 years, you need to take care of her. But it all depends on how you write it, which is one of those great things in Judaism where words matter.
Rabbi, if there was something that would get somebody out of a ketubah, like adultery or some kind of defect in a woman, would this still apply?
No. So let's say, for example, adultery, right? The woman is clearly seen as an adulteress. It's obvious. There's proof, evidence, trial, everything. No doubt she is an adulteress. Then yes, the woman is divorced and she does not receive her ketubah. This contract would keep going because this contract is with the daughter and was not contingent upon the mother's behavior. Now, if the father or if the mother and the husband write, you have to pay for my daughter for 5 years on the condition that I don't commit adultery, then adultery would cancel it. So it all comes down to the language that is written into the agreement.
The small letter.
The small print, exactly, the small print. So, all those things on the commercials, following contract may be null and void if you commit adultery. It's like,
You weren't allowed to use small print back then, were you?
you were not allowed to use deceptive print. You were allowed to add as many conditions as you and the other person were willing to agree to, but it could not be deceptive. So you couldn't deliberately write it small so that the person didn't check and see what it meant. But you could absolutely add 100, 1,000 different conditions if you and your partner were willing to agree to it. Just usually if there are that many conditions, you probably don't want to agree to it. All right. Ketubot 12:3. We're on Mishnah 3. We're going to change topics and we're going to go back to our topic that we've touched on a few times of the widow right? The man died, or sorry, let me erase my timeline because this is a totally different timeline. The man died, and the woman to whom he made the ketubah is still alive. Where does she have to live? How quickly does she have to get her ketubah? Does she like get kicked out the next day? Can she stay forever? What's going on? So that's what 12.3 is going to introduce us to. Yarach, do you mind?
1. A widow says, I do not want to move from my husband's house. The heirs cannot tell her, go to your father's house, and we will maintain you. Rather, they must maintain her in her husband's house, and they give her a residence according to her honor.
Okay, so the basic thing is that a woman who was living with her husband and he dies is allowed to continue to live in the house. Doesn't have to be in the same room, but it does have to be of a similar quality, right? They're not allowed to say, sure, there's a shed out in the backyard, you can live there, right? She is allowed to stay, and indefinitely at the moment. We're going to modify that a little bit.
The daughter also can stay there.
We're not talking about the daughter anymore.
No, but
Yeah. But yes, presumably if she has children, they would be staying. And if they were children with him, the children were automatically going to be maintained by the estate.
of course, but also the her children have the right to stay.
Yes, right. But they do not necessarily have the right to be maintained by the estate.
If they maintain
If they didn't make a agreement for that, if she has stepchildren, right, that are not his, then if there was no agreement, the estate does not owe her children, the non-his children, anything, because they're just other people, but they do owe her.
Yeah, but she need to maintain the children.
Well,
And
so most likely what would happen was she would get married to someone else, right? She would scrape by and be able to do, and again, most people were civil about this, and they would give her time to find a new husband who would be willing to support her and her children, and then she'd move to his house. Or she would, if she had to desperately, move back to her parents' house and live there. So those were other options. But the estate was not under legal obligation to support children that were not from the man whose estate it is. Right? So, but what's interesting here is that she has the right to stay put. Right? Even if the children, the actual heirs, don't want her around and say, just go home, right? They're not allowed to kick her out. She is allowed to stay because that is kind of her home. Even though she doesn't own it, she does have the right to stay there and be maintained. Now, remember, while she's being maintained, she is not collecting her ketubah. Right? So they're giving her breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Well, actually, usually it was just breakfast, dinner. They didn't have 3 meals. Usually they had 2 meals. That's why Shabbat was special with Seudah Shlishi, with the 3rd meal. But that's also why they were thinner than we were. Also, they worked harder. But she does have the right to eat and stay there in the relative lifestyle that she had while her husband was alive. They can't like make her live in some horrible little corner under the stairs, right? And live in the sukkah. I'm thinking Harry Potter under the stairs, right? They're not allowed to do that. But this is with her still not collecting her ketubah. Okay, so that's where we are.
Does this apply in Jerusalem too?
You mean in other residences?
I thought there was one place where they said they could force the woman to take the ketubah. Didn't we read that previously? There were other stipulations, but this is dealing with the more generic case. Generic is good.
That's a very good welfare state system.
Well, wait, but the state's not doing it.
No, but it's kind of a welfare system.
Okay, so it is exactly a welfare system in the
Social security.
in the usual term of the real meaning of the word welfare.
Yeah.
So I think I mentioned this at the very, very beginning of Ketubot, but always bears repeating, and I'm sorry if you've heard me too many times say this. This idea of having a ketubah at all, where is this in the Torah? It's not. Right? This is not in the Torah. This is what was called tikkun olam in the rabbinic literature. Now, modern usage of the word tikkun olam usually means more like social justice, fighting poverty and saving the rainforest and other very good social acts. But this was what the rabbis were thinking of tikkun olam, because the rainforest didn't need us to help it at the time. What they thought was that there were certain parts of the world that were broken, right? That the way the society was working wasn't working for everybody. And so they had to make a tikkun. They had to make a repair. They had to tweak the system to make sure that people would not be hurt by the world, right? The world was like a big wheel, and the wheel kept hitting certain people, women in particular. And so they had to make a tikkun, they had to make a repair to fix that. And one of the tikkun that they made was the ketubah. And with the ketubah, as you can see in general, they also added in extra padding, extra protection, a welfare system
So
to
it's
make
a
sure that
social security.
women would not end up begging on the street.
But the estate was still entitled to her handiwork, right?
Yes, she was still meant to be a productive member of the household. That still stayed the same as when she was married to him.
The same jobs or maybe the worse jobs.
She was still expected to provide the same type of productivity she provided when she was married. We talked about all of the different amounts of spinning and weaving and things like that. So that's what they expected. They couldn't make her go and, shovel the manure from the cows and all of that. If that was not her normal job, she couldn't.
So they cannot denigrate her, not to force her to find another husband.
Not in that way. Of course, they can be rude. They can gossip about her. They can do all sorts of other mean things. But her basic subsistence and existence, that they were not allowed to take away from her. So there's no system that's perfect, because people can always be jerks. That's like a bumper sticker. But this was a way to make a tikkun, to make a repair that could hopefully prevent the worst problems from happening in the society. And the worst problem here being that women would be kicked out with nothing and would, starve on the street. So that was what they were concerned about. All right. Part 2, I think we're on.
Yeah. If she said, I have no desire to move from my father's house, the heirs can say to her, if you stay with us, you have your maintenance. But if you do not stay with us, you will receive no maintenance.
All right. So she can't say, I'm going to get a little apartment of my own. You can send the check there. No. You can get your ketubah, or you can live here. You don't get to have an apartment and get your maintenance money there. That's not what's going to happen. So she doesn't have 100% freedom to what would be considered abuse the system. Make sense?
Only the house.
Only in the house, exactly. That's, you're part of the household. You can stay here as long as you need, more or less, and we'll take care of you until you get your ketubah and leave, however long that might be. But that doesn't mean you can get money from our estate wherever you go, right? We're not going to send a check to the Bahamas for you. If you live here, you live here. And if you go back to your father's house, you get your ketubah. Those are your options. It did. Right? Again, the rabbis, as much as they wanted to make a tikkun, they also didn't want to make the system abused from the other direction.
Yeah.
Exactly. Number 3?
Number 3. If she claimed that she did not want to live there because she is young and they are young, they must maintain her while she lives in the house of her father.
Okay, so I know this is something that it's still hard for many people to think of in the modern world, where many people don't have their first kids until they're in their 30s. And by the time those kids are grown up, it's like the kid is 20 and the parent is 50. And it's like 20 and 50-year-olds usually are not like dating. But back in the day, it was very easy to have stepchildren that would be very close in age to the new parent, in this case, the mom, the stepmom. So the stepchildren could be 20 years old, and she could be like, 28. And that is close enough that living in the same house, she and the stepson, there might be too much temptation. And so she can say, look, if I stay here, people are going to talk. They're going to think that we're up to something. So I'm going to go to my father's house. You can send the check there. And the rabbi said, yeah, that's okay. In that circumstance, it's better for there to be some separation.
Can she marry the stepchildren?
By the Torah, there are certain categories of relationship where it could, but the rabbi said,
No.
no, that they were not going to have certain other types of relationships were prohibited, even if the Torah did not explicitly forbid them.
Didn't the Torah explicitly prohibit?
Stepchildren and stepmom?
Yeah, your father's wife.
Yes, sorry. Yes, you're right. I was thinking of like aunts, uncles, and all of that, like other things that also we wouldn't want, but the Torah doesn't explicitly talk about. All right, 12:4. Let's talk more about Ketubah collection.
Annualize and re-link them.
Then pass.
Yeah.
As long as she lives in her father's house, she may collect her ketubah at any time.
All right, so she moves back with dad, or her uncle or whoever else, and while she's there, remember we talked about, unless she is a young widow, she's not getting maintenance, but she is allowed to say, okay, I want my ketubah now. Right? She is allowed to delay collecting the ketubah until she is ready for it. Good, that's the general part. Part A.
As long as she lives in her husband's house, she may recover her ketubah only within 25 years, because in the course of 25 years, she has sufficient opportunity to give her favorite equal in value to the amount of her ketubah the words of Rabbi Meir, who spoke in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben
Gamliel, yes. Okay, so the whole part 1 is from Rabbi Meir's opinion. So what he is saying is, if she's with dad, she can collect her ketubah whenever she feels like it. If she's staying in the house, she's got 25 years, and then she gets nothing. Why? Because while she's in the house, when she invites her friends over, and when she has a party, or when she gives a birthday present to someone, she's probably using the resources of the house. And so after 25 years, she's probably given away, technically, the ketubah amount. And so the family should not be obligated to have to provide the full ketubah value at the end of the 25 years.
Why did he pick 25 years?
That was his estimate of when the quantity would have run out. But as we're going to see, he loses. Right, that was Rabbi Meir's opinion. Don't get too attached to it, because it's going to turn out to be the losing argument. That's a general rule, by the way, that anytime Rabbi Meir comes with an opinion on his own, he loses. Basically, because if it was his own opinion, stated in his own name, it meant no one else was smart enough to argue with him, so it hadn't been properly checked and tested. Now, just let that sink in for a moment. Right? Rabbi Meir was considered to be so smart that when he made an opinion, others couldn't argue well enough against him to be sure it was the right opinion. And that means we don't listen to him. However, don't feel too bad for him, because all the Mishnah that you see that doesn't have a name on it, if it doesn't have a name on it, it's Rabbi Meir. Right? Rabbi Meir is considered to be the author of every anonymous Mishnah that is throughout the entire book. So he still has plenty of credibility. But whenever it's just in his name, then it was considered no one else could figure out what he was talking about enough to be able to check it. Okay.
He was one of Akiva's 5 students, right?
Yes, exactly. And considered to be the most brilliant. Okay, part 2.
What is that, sages?
Sages, yes.
Sages say, as long as she lives in her husband's house, she may collect her ketubah at any time. As long as she lives in her father's house, she may collect her ketubah only within 25 years.
Okay, so the sages have a different idea. They say, look, if she's living in the husband's house, right, as a widow, then she can stay there as long as she wants. Right? We're not going to be keeping track of every party she has and every cupcake she gives to a neighbor and all of that. No, she can stay there as long as she wants, because she's still part of the household. And when she wants to collect her ketubah, she can collect her ketubah. On the other hand, if she moves out and she's staying with her father's house, after 25 years, the estate should not be responsible for still keeping track of how much they owe her for when she might need it. A debt should be collected within 25 years, right? Because after that point, she's basically fully divorced from the family that she has left behind in that other estate.
So if she moved her father,
Right.
she doesn't need to collect the ketubah. She can collect only maintenance.
She can collect her ketubah, but if she doesn't collect her ketubah in 25 years,
And that's mean it's not an
Yeah.
obligation. She doesn't. She can go to the her
Yes.
father's house
and not collect,
but yes, receive maintenance.
only if it's because she's young,
Yes.
right? If she was not worried about any
okay, so
hanky
that's a
panky
continuation for the first part.
Right.
Or the last part. Of the
in the last part of the other one,
Yes.
exactly.
Okay. Only if she's young.
Because if she's young, then she can leave and she can get maintenance at her father's house. If she's older and not a sexual threat within the household, then she has to stay in the household if she wants to get maintenance. But when she leaves, she doesn't have to get her ketubah immediately. She can wait for whatever reason to collect her ketubah. But the sages are saying 25 years is long enough to figure out when you want your ketubah. And the estate should not be responsible for having to worry about this debt hanging for 25 years over them, or more than 25 years over them.
And she can remarry and still receive the ketubah
Yes,
for the previous one.
yes. The ketubah is a debt. Exactly. All right, and part 3.
If the widow died, her heirs must mention her ketubah within 25 years.
Right. Remember again that the ketubah is technically a debt owed to her, and therefore it is something that the heirs of her can collect. Again, if you're in a regular family if you're in a nuclear family, where it's mother, father, they die, the kids are the heirs, it's not complicated. But if you have all of these stepkids coming around, that's when all this argument could be more problematic. Then the heirs only get 25 years from the moment she dies. Again, we can't just have the debt hanging over the estate forever before they finally come to collect. Good? That's chapter 12. Short.
The years only get 25 years?
The heirs only get 25 years. Her heirs must mention her ketubah within 25 years.
From her death.
From her death, yes.
Not from the
Not from the divorce, yeah. Or the widowship or whatever. No. I know 25 may still seem generous, but but it is a debt, and therefore the initial burden is upon the estate. But after a while, you do need to move them along. Come on, guys.
Well, it must be very difficult for the state to calculate everything and to keep in reserve the ketubah in case that she can decide at any time. Because if she want to collect, you need to have the money or whatever.
And they did it without QuickBooks, right? I mean,
must be very, very stressful for the state.
The accounting of ancient estates, I mean, when people were alive and inheritance and all of that, was a very complicated process. And people would keep their records, and they would fight over those records a lot. And that continued all the way up into the modern world, where people continue to fight over the accounting of different things.
Rabbi, so if he were to die and his estate would be being divvied up,
Right?
they could put the estate on hold, like we'll say the probate on hold for 25 years.
I don't know that it would be put on hold for the 25 years, but there would definitely be a lien on the property, even as it was divided, in order to ensure that the value of the ketubah was still being protected.
So for 25 years they could go after the heirs of.
Yes. And they could cancel sales if there was a problem, and saying, wait, if you sell that, then what's going to be left for the ketubah? Those kinds of issues would still crop up.
And they could pick and choose which year they get the land from, right?
Are you saying people could be jerks? Yes, people could be jerks. And are you saying that people could manipulate the system for their own self, and that the court would probably have to be involved if they were somehow playing one heir off another and looking for gifts and kickbacks and all of those kinds of things? Absolutely. Welcome to human society, where people can be really mean.
My family, there was a case like that.
What's that?
My family.
Oh, really?
Side, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was a case like that. There was a cousin
Mm-hmm.
married somebody. It was second marriage for both of them.
Right.
And he owned an apartment, and he said he's going to write down the apartment on his own, on her name too. And he never did. And when he died, his kids wanted the apartment.
Of course.
And the court said no. she isn't.
He promised it to her. Right.
That's her apartment. But there was a speculation that she only can live in there until she dies, and only her heirs can stay in it for whatever.
They couldn't rent it to someone else. Right.
Yeah.
So they had occupancy rights, but they didn't have ownership rights.
Yeah.
That's an interesting compromise. Yes. But it sounds very similar to the case of the widow staying in the apartment, staying in the house. Yes. So.
In modern times, I think that's how it is. If a guy dies, if the wife has a life estate,
Mhm.
the kids get the inheritance. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's what I remember.
I do not know American law well enough to weigh in on that. That's not what I studied, but it wouldn't surprise me. Law has been developing for a few thousand years, and I know that some of our sources have made their way into other systems. Okay, so I think we can just start chapter 13. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and start anyway. It's really all one big unit, but the main theme behind this unit is not actually the content. The main theme behind this unit is who is involved in the unit. We are looking at two guys. We have Admon and Hanan ben Avshalom. And these are two types of two judges from the days of Jerusalem. And they were doing special fines. It's like a special penalty court that they were in charge of. And so we're going to be reading through some of their rulings that deal with our topics, but it's structured around them rather than around the topic itself.
Why are they so important?
I don't know. I mean,
which era, more or less?
They're from the time of the Second Temple, before the Second Temple was destroyed, but sometime slightly before that. So, but I don't remember seeing a specific year that they were alive.
It'd be right after Hillel, right?
Well, let me just double check. I've got another resource that sometimes can answer those types of questions.
Rabbi Yonin ben Zakkai would have been.
Well, Yochanan ben Zakkai was right at the fall, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he was alive contemporaneously with them.
Why they pick these two? Because probably at the same position where many others.
Nope, my other text does not give me a specific date for the Messiah. All right, so that's homework. We'll see if we can find exactly when they lived. But
yeah, and the reason why they pick them as example.
Well, as we're going to see, because they had some very interesting cases and interesting rulings, and their debates help clarify some of the matters of law that we've been dealing with. Okay, so I believe, Natan, that it is you.
Yes.
Oh, did your commentary say anything? I forgot that you have the different volume. Does it give us any more biographical?
They say during the Second Temple
Yeah.
period.
Okay, so everyone agrees it was the Second Temple period. Good.
Yeah. Yeah, they say the Second Jerusalem.
Right. Okay, so let's go ahead and start up.
There were two churches of the Greeks in Jerusalem, Admon and Hanan. Hanan pronounced two decisions, Admon pronounced 7.
Right, that sounds very familiar to Ediot when we studied through that.
If a man went overseas and his wife claims maintenance.
All right, let's make sure we got the idea here. She is home. He is a sailor. He is a trader. He is somebody who is doing a trip, and he's gone a long time. So she needs food, but the property belongs to him. So the question is, if she doesn't have enough money to buy food for herself, what happens?
I think she's allowed to sell part of the land.
Please read.
Hanan says she takes an oath at the end, but she does not take an oath at the beginning.
What? Okay, so here's what's happening. So as Natan rightly said, she is allowed to sell some of the property in order to buy food so that she doesn't starve to death. But because she is using his property, she is going to have to swear at some point that what she is doing is necessary and legitimate, right? So she has to swear, I didn't buy a fur coat with the money he left, and that's why I needed to sell something to buy more food. She has to swear that she has not misused any of the funding. The question is, does she have to make that oath before she sells the property and feeds herself? Or does she only have to make that oath when he gets back and wants to know why she sold this, that, and the other. And as we just saw from Hanan, he says she has to make an oath at the beginning and an oath at the end. That she has to make an oath before the court lets her sell anything, meaning that's an oath in front of the court. And she has to make an oath when the husband shows up saying that she didn't misappropriate anything either.
So the court can say to her, you know what, that's not true, you don't need.
If there was overwhelming evidence that she absolutely had the food or the money to provide for herself and there was no need to sell it, then yes, the court could step in to prevent that. But you would need overwhelming evidence. You can't just say, yeah, she looks, like she's perfectly fine. You would actually need some sort of like witnesses saying that she's scheming to sell the land to her brother or something. You'd have to have some really credible reason for thinking that this was inappropriate. The court would generally default to saying yes.
And what happens if no one can work the land? She's by herself and she cannot work all the land.
That's a problem. Which is
That's
why
what she said.
when you leave home, you provide for your wife, right? What did the husband think was going to happen if he left her in a farm and like one sick donkey, and he's gone for a year and a half? What did he think she was going to eat? So that's what exactly. She's going to eat donkey. That's what she's going to eat. But
Rice and beans.
yeah, donkey's not kosher, by the way. Okay, so part 2. Or part 2A, or part 2B rather for us.
The sons of the high priest
Which was like the other court at the time.
disagree with him. And they said, she takes an oath at the beginning and at the end.
Right. I'm sorry. I think when I stated Hanan, I gave it wrong. So, but the sons are saying that she would take an oath at the beginning and at the end, whereas Hanan said she only takes the oath at the end. Okay, so now we're going to get Dosa ben Harkanos.
The high priest wouldn't be Sadducees, would they?
It's unclear. So for historical purposes, it could be that they were the establishment within the temple, but they're not called Sadducees in the text. So we might hypothesize that they might have been, but we don't have a way to say definitively that they were.
Since they're still in the temple period,
Mhm.
they still had a lot of power.
They still had power, and they still disagreed with the rabbis on many points. But it's unclear exactly whether they were or were not officially not rabbinic Judaism.
That's why it's so important that the temple's still standing partly, right?
Partly, yes, exactly. All right. So, what do we have as our responses?
Rabbi Dosa ben Harkinas reiterated the words.
So he likes the sons of the high priest. He likes their opinion, but
Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai said Hanan pronounced well that she takes an oath only at the end.
all right. And the halacha goes according to Hanan, right? That she only has to take an oath when the husband returns. That if she needs food, she is allowed to sell, but she knows that when the husband shows up, there will be an accounting. And if it's suspected that she misused it, she will be forced to swear before God that she did not misuse the funds.
So at the end is when the husband
Yep,
returned.
exactly.
That's at the end.
That's what the end
I
is.
thought that was at the beginning when she asked permission to sell, and at the end when she already sold.
No. The end is when the husband comes home for the reckoning.
Okay.
Because the husband might come back and say, well, I left you plenty. And how could you not, have been fine? And so that's where the argument would come. And then, there would be this issue. All right. We're going to do 13.2 just because it's also with Hanan. And then we'll call it a night. And it's a pretty short one.
If a man went to a country beyond the sea and someone came forward and financially supported his wife, Hanan said he lost his money.
Okay, so pardon the expression, Good Samaritan. All right, there is a man, he goes on a trip, just like in Mishnah 1, and the wife doesn't have enough. And so a kindly neighbor gives her food or gives her money to make sure that she has enough. Now, don't get your mind out of the gutter.
I thought immediately that was a lover.
Yeah, no. Okay, she's 20, he's 85 years old, okay? Just imagine he's a nice old man, doesn't like the fact that his neighbor is not being, that his neighbor's wife is not being taken care of, And so he gives her money each day so she can go to the market and still have enough to eat. Blah, 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 blah. When the husband comes home, does that man have a claim on the money he spent for taking care of the woman, right? Against the husband.
No, because he didn't have any contact with the husband.
Well, that's what Hanan says, right? Hanan says he lost the money, right? Very nice what you did, but that money's gone, right? It's not coming back. That's Hanan's opinion.
All right, just like asking, is the wife allowed to mortgage the property instead of sell it?
She is allowed to use other financial techniques she could rent the property out. She can do other things with the property in order to provide for herself.
And she needs also permission from the court for all those different techniques and tools.
No, but she will have to swear at the end if there's a disagreement about what she did.
But would she be allowed to mortgage it? That way, when the husband returned, he said, "Give me the money or give me your land."
It would provide for a different remedy in the end. Yes, so that could provide a different remedy. All right, part 2: the sons of the priests.
The sons of the high priest differed from him and said, "Let him take an oath as to how much he spent and recover it."
They said, no, he should get his money back. He was taking care of the guy's wife. All he has to do is swear how much was it, and then the husband owes him for taking care of his
Well,
wife.
they can ask the wife, the wife.
Well,
How much?
they don't take women's word for the witnesses, so that's a whole nother issue. So, but at least this would be okay. However,
Rabbi Joseph ben Harkin agrees with their ruling.
you think sounds good to me, but guess what?
Rabbi Yehona ben Zakkai said, "Hanan has spoke well. The man put his money on the horn of a deer."
Which is my new favorite idiom, right? So basically he said, no, you just put your money on the antlers of a deer, and the deer
No way.
ran away. You're never going to see it again, right? It's an idiom for you attached your money to the back of a train, and it's gone, baby. It's gone. And that's, like I said, that's my new idiom. I need to find a new ways to use that in daily conversation. But he's basically saying Hanan is right, that this is money that is just lost. It's not lost because you've done a mitzvah. You certainly have done good by your neighbor and all of that. But if you think you're getting the money back, I'm sorry, you're not.
And what happened if the wife really was in need of the money and she said, instead of sell the property,
Mhm.
I prefer to ask him for a loan or for money. So that's why he maintained it, because I tried to keep the property together.
So she's not legally allowed to enter into a loan agreement, right? She can't actually take out a loan on her husband, like in his name, right? She could rent the property to the guy, and they could even come up with a fiction, right? She could say, okay, I'm going to rent you the corner of the field for three shekels. And that'll be enough. And then the guy never actually uses the corner of the shield, but at least they have an official agreement and a running tally. And then, yes, there would be grounds. Or she could sell him the corner of the field for however much he ends up spending. So that they could come up with a way to protect the guy. Remember, like we saw in chapter 12, if you're smart,
Yes.
you can make a contract that will work.
Provisions.
Right? You can make provisions in the contract and in the agreement. But this case is not, it's not that the man's not smart. It's that the man is not being money smart. He's just being kind and helpful. And that's not a problem. But being kind and helpful doesn't guarantee that your money will get back to you.
Is it weird that she can actually sell him the land and not be able to mortgage the land?
It has to deal with her status as a woman, of what arrangements that she can make. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, and what happened if she does a kind of agreement like with the in the sabbatical year? I sell you the property
Right.
with the condition you pay me, and the condition that when my husband come back, you
Be redeemed.
redeem.
Like we said at the very beginning of chapter 12, or chapter 12 too, you can make lots of conditions
Provision,
and provisions. You can get as complicated as you and your partner are willing to get. So this is talking about the vanilla case. When you look through the documents of the Middle Ages, the literature, there are lots of very complicated laws, very complicated contracts that then have to be handled under different judges. So we got very good at writing contracts that were protective of everybody.
Yeah, because you always can be creative.
Well, you always can be, but that doesn't mean everyone always thinks that way. To Yerach's example of somebody who says they're going to do something and then they forget to put it into paper, that's a problem. So the guy could have thought, oh, I'm going to be gone for 3 months. I've left plenty of money for my wife. It'll be fine. And then the boat gets, cast in a storm, and he's Odysseus coming home after 40 years, right? And what's going on? And now you have to deal with things where there wasn't. And his wife and the community were not clever to come up with systems that would protect everybody's interest. So do they have a claim or don't they? That's what we're dealing with here. Remember, as we've talked about before, the Mishnah is mostly dealing with either the very plain case or the worst case. The stuff in the middle, usually clever people have already figured that out, and it never gets to court because it's already handled. So we want to know what the basic law is, and we want to know what the worst case scenario is, so that we can handle those different levels. All right, that's where we are. We'll finish up chapter 13 next week, I'm pretty sure, and then we'll set our course for a new Masechet.
Are you sure that we didn't study a book?